Hello, Widowhood. Welcome to today's Saturday Sit Down. But technically, it's more of a Saturday stand up. I stand up at work, so I was like, let me see how this goes. So let's go with this. And another thing I'm doing a bit of a tweak is I am going to try to cover the top three items or topics that I think from the podcast and in this conversation. So the first thing I like to talk about, I'll do a little bit of talking about the guests, and that will not count as my top three topics. I want to say that I am so grateful for Alma Davis. She literally was one of my lifelines in this process. I was able to connect with Alma because one of her cousins worked with me. And when he heard that Mark passed, he instantly reached out to me and expressed his sympathy for my situation, but he wanted to connect me with his cousin, who was also a widow, and thought that our interaction would be helpful. And he was spot on. I literally left Pennsylvania, flew to California after very minimal conversations with Alma, stayed in her home for the weekend, attended a widows conference, connected with other ladies, and was just inspired. I remember walking up and down the hills in California and Alma being so candid and pouring out the most intimate details of her life and her journey of being a widow. And that inspired me and just gave me the reality of how important it is to create your own personal widowhood. Those people that you need to have in your life to be able to help you with this process. You met a lot of other people that have been part of my journey, and now you've met Alma Davis, which is to me at this point the person I know that has been a widow the longest, and it's just been inspirational to me. So, for my top three topics, the first is the strong zone. What is the strong zone? It's when you act like you have everything together, that you are so strong. You can organize this, you can do that, and you don't make any space for anybody to see that you are weak. That you don't make any space for anybody to see where they can insert themselves into your process and be of some help. Alma and I both talked about how being in the strong zone literally wore us out. We were exhausted. We were trying to keep everything together. We were trying to make sure that the house looked good. We were trying to make sure that we looked fine, that the children were taken care of, and everything was in its spot. And we didn't have really the mental capacity, the bandwidth emotionally to be able to do all that. But I know for me that I thought if I continually kept everything in order, if I continually kept everything in its place, that everything would be okay. And you know what I realized being in the strong zone? It was a facade. There was nothing to make it okay anymore. There was no amount of making everything nice and neat that was going to make this situation get better. And once I came to that conclusion, it literally was because I was exhausted. Like I couldn't hold up the front any longer. And when I did that, it gave space for more people to find a place to insert themselves into the process. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is healthcare challenges. There is not a widow or widower that I have spoken to that has not expressed how the death of their spouse has impacted their health. For me, my blood pressure went up like ain't nobody's business, and I was literally devastated. Recently, I actually started using a CPAP machine, and my blood pressure has gone down. Alma talked about some of her health challenges with her heart, dealing with breast cancer and some other different things. If I haven't already, I have dealt with breast cancer shortly before Mark passed. I think the mental anguish of our loved ones leaving here affects us physically. And so we are so distressed emotionally about our late spouse's passing that it weakens us in all different areas. And I share that if you are having some health challenges, to seek out your medical professionals. Seek out the people, your primary care physician, your therapist. Tell them what's going on. Don't think that this is an isolated incident. You are stressed out, you are overwhelmed. Maybe ask if you can go for a walk. Do some deep breathing, some prayer, some meditation. Do some things to deal with that stress that you are having to manage because of the death of your spouse or loved one. It is not just going to go away, but there are things that you can do to help yourself. And I share that as one of my top three because I want you to know that you are important, that your life matters. I don't want you to cast aside your own particular health as you deal and struggle with the loss of your loved one. I want you to care about you. I know it may seem hard because in their absence, sometimes you feel like there's nothing worth caring about, but you are important and you are worth caring about. And I want you to do the work for you. I want you to check in with your physician and ask them, how do I deal with this anxiety? How do I deal with this stress of the loss of my loved one? What are some of the recommendations that you can give me to help me deal with this? And lean in to that. I don't want you to run away from the anguish and the pain that your body is experiencing from the loss of your loved one. I invite you to lean into it because it's not going away. But what you can possibly do is learn how to lean into it and manage it in such a way that is healthy for your body. And that's what I want for you. The third topic that I want to talk about from the conversation was Alma was being unavailable emotionally, physically, or spiritually for my children. My children had the loss of their dad, and they also had to experience the loss of their mom. So they are experiencing the most devastating moment of their life and simultaneously experiencing the loss of both parents. Mark was dead. He was no longer in this world, and I was literally emotionally tapped out. There were like a good 6 months that the communication with my children were minimal. When I go back and I think about that and I look over, if there was one thing I wish that I could change, and I do harbor some guilt about, was my lack of availability to Catherine and Alexander. I was devastated beyond comprehension. I was struggling every day just to get up, to breathe, to live, to exist, to function, to just figure out how to leave the house. I didn't have anything to give to them. Not at all. About 6 months down the road, Mark passed in March, and we were getting ready for the holidays. And I was looking at my phone and I was thinking about the lack of communication with my children. And I was like, where have I been? And even though I may feel a little guilty, there is nothing I could have done to change that. It was that hard. I thank God for carrying them through. I thank God for the friends and family and people that filled in the gap when I wasn't able to be there for my own children. And I'm sharing that with you for you to know how common it is to not have anything, to be so empty emotionally, physically, and spiritually that you are barely surviving and that you have nothing to give to anyone else. I ask you not to take on that guilt that I took on for myself because I wasn't aware of how devastating and how much incapacitated I was in dealing with the death of my husband. I talk to my children now about it, and they gave me grace. They have given me forgiveness and said, Mom, that I understand. But I'm grateful that I had the conversation with them to talk about how I felt, talk about my absence during a time that I felt like they needed me most, and to hear their perspective. I know I am fortunate that I have adult children, and some of you are dealing with grief and you are having to raise your children in the absence of a parent. And that brings on a whole different level of complications. Give yourself grace. Know that you are doing the best that you know how. And your ability to tap out emotionally may not even exist. You may be crying in the shower. You may be screaming in the car after you have dropped your child off for childcare. You may be driving to an isolated area to be able to decompress. And I want you to know you're not alone. There are other people having that same experience. I want you to reach out to a therapist, to a counselor, to your clergy. Don't suffer this alone. Don't put on the strong zone. Don't let your health be impacted. And understand that your emotional, physical, and spiritual bandwidth can only go so wide. And that is what grief looks like. But what I am also, and I'm going to throw in another one, is Alma Davis to be able to say, after 21 years of grieving her late spouse, that she still has hope for a new day. She still has expectations for things to be worth living for. And that is what I want you to walk away with. Not just the 3 things that are on this list, but the idea that you can endure this, you can survive this, and you can also create a life that thrives, a life that you will be happy for, and a life that has joy in it. So you be encouraged. Thank you for being here with me for this conversation. And I invite you to check out the podcast that just aired this week with Alma Davis. And I ask you to reach out, to go to our website, send us an email, tell us about sharing your journey or topics that you would like to have discussed. widowhoodrealtalkwithtina.org. Talk to you soon.